Good morning.
Sorry, running a minute or two late. Sorry about that.
It's okay. We're on the record case number 12 CF 1083A, State versus George Zimmerman.
Where we left it last night was the issue of the animation. We had a deposition last night that I think focused the inquiry a bit. I know that the state still has some concerns that they need to address. I don't think it's as much like we talked about yesterday as an admissibility problem itself as to the underlying science, but a question of the applicability to the facts.
Actually, based upon the testimony, I have supplemented the original motion again this morning, and I now do believe that there is both concerns, both the Daubert sort of admissibility issue as well as the earlier concerns, most of them that I had originally outlined. The reason is this. The gist, and I do have a copy for the court of the deposition from last night. I got an electronic copy mailed to me. This is part 3 of the witness's deposition. And essentially what we have now done from the state's perspective is we have moved from the witness initially creating the exhibit that he said represented essentially the physical evidence as well as things he gathered from police reports and witness statements. Now, what changed since the last portion of the deposition, which is what resulted in the production of the animation I received yesterday, is that we have now taken the animation and attempted to fit it to the theory of an expert who has yet to actually testify about it. So we have now gone from, and that's the reason that the state now believes that there is now a Daubert issue, because we have now moved from simple representation as to physical items to now attempting to create essentially a animated, I don't know if you want to call it a cartoon, but an animated depiction of the theory that that Dr. DeMaio discussed with this witness on the phone on Saturday after Mr. Shoemaker had been deposed twice, but right before Dr. DeMaio's deposition. At least that's according to the timing that Mr. Shoemaker told us last night. So because of that, because of what came out in that deposition that I'm glad the court authorized last night, I do now think that we need to expand this hearing to include Daubert materials, and I do have some cases that point that out why, but whether we call it a Daubert or Fry hearing, a combination Daubert, Fry, Pierce hearing, I think that all those issues now need to get fleshed out based upon the reasons for this change and what they represent. And I filed a supplemental motion this morning accordingly. I would also point out, during last night's deposition, the witness indicated that he had prepared additional still depictions, and also it showed me or displayed a computer diagram, indicated I was going to be getting copies of that. I got the court reporter's promised transcript, but I have gotten nothing yet from the witness. So I still don't have those physical things to hand to the court to show you, but that is the reason for the supplemental motion, and I apologize for now telling the court that we do want what I hoped wasn't necessary yesterday, but given what was said last night, I believe it is.
Okay, defense response.
A factual response first, I guess, is probably appropriate, and that is that the concern evidenced by the state through various paragraphs in the supplemental motion basically address the one fact issue that is in fact undisputed, and that is that Dr. Shipping-Bow and our expert as to the medical examiner, the pathologist, is that the gun shot entered Mr. Martin at approximately a 90-degree angle from the plane of the chest and somewhere close to a straight through shot. There is a little bit of angling as it enters the body off dead center line, but there's no dispute as to that underlying fact. It is that underlying fact that led to what I believe to be, if I understand the motion, the state's concern, and that is that Mr. Shoemaker, who had attended to the making of the animations for the last several weeks, all of which up to the last couple of days the state has been well aware of, deposed and given copies of, in consultation with Dr. DeMaio, added to that fact the potential of the distance from the gun to the body, testified in part by Dr. Bow in that he said the only distance he would give is somewhere between 0.4 inches and 4 feet. The anticipated testimony of Dr. DeMaio, as was referenced in his sworn testimony, is that it's somewhere between 2 and 4 inches. So we had prepared an exhibit to document that. Because of the lateness of concern and the state's concern over that, I'm very fine with not using that still. It's not part of the animation, but that still. I think I can probably use it in closing as a demonstrative tool. I don't think that's necessary for the court's consideration as far as evidence. So that's withdrawn. And I mentioned that to the state a moment ago. It's why I stood up at the bench when he was talking, just to make sure that that was clear, because it was just discussed last night. That leaves the underlying fact that the state seems to suggest is a concern, and that is the positioning of the bodies when the shot was fired. We know the relative positioning of the gun and the body at 90 degrees. So then what's not known, and what is depicted in the animation as the probable positioning of the bodies based upon John Good's testimony, is what I guess is an issue. And that is that if you keep the body and the gun together, maybe 2 or 4 inches, but for purposes of me talking to you, let's just put it up against. But certainly, if Mr. Martin was like this, or even maybe the state could argue like this, although John Good has it about like this because he has him mounted over him and leaning over him, that is what we had used, John Good's specific testimony and the only eyewitness testimony as to the relative positions when he saw it. Now, I'll tell you, the state's going to say, well, he didn't see the gunshot. He left a few seconds before, so there could have been movement. And I think that goes to something the state can argue to the jury. They can even have decided to come up with their own animation with something different, or their own expert to suggest something different. They haven't, but they could have. So I think that it's reasonable for us, based upon the evidence, particularly John Good's testimony, and Shipping Bow's testimony and the anticipated testimony of Dr. DeMaio, that we have an animation that has the bodies in that position. They can certainly suggest what they want to, but I don't believe, and I've never seen, that evidence admissibility is dependent upon it not having some argument to the jury that it may have happened differently. Every witness who came in and gave testimony, whether it be Mr. Shoemaker, Dr. DeMaio, Dr. Bow, or anybody else, is up for impeachment before the jury. So I don't understand now why that makes it a Fry or Daubert admissibility concern when we know that animations are very admissible and often used more in civil cases but also in criminal cases. Pierce was a criminal case. And as long as it does, based upon facts adduced at trial, which this is, and can assist the trier of fact, which I think it can, and not to mention the fact that it is specifically in line with the facts of the evidence and supports our theory of the defense as to how things happened, and there's nothing to contest it. I don't believe if we were to go through a Daubert, Pierce, Fry standard, it would meet admissibility, so maybe we need to do that now. But the underlying facts are supported by the evidence, so I'm not certain. While I see the state is saying they talked, but they didn't talk and come up with anything different than John Good testified to. So I'm not certain what their true objection is to the admissibility of it, because what they're saying is now it's just based upon what we talked about. Well, no, it's based upon the 90-degree angle, and that's the one underlying undisputed fact that is the premise for the positioning of the parties. Now, as to the entirety of the animation, since I guess we're talking about all of it, what you'll see, and you really need to take a look at it, so we'll present it to you in a moment, what you'll see is it is more than an animation, it's more like a series of stills, because in response to states' concerns in the past, we took out animation and replaced it with a still. For example, there was movement of the arms in one shot, and there was 8, or there were 10, or there were 4, or there were 30.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if we were just to start with the hearing, and then you can give the argument after the hearing. So the defense has the burden. So call your first witness.
Call Daniel Shoemaker. We'll take a moment to get his hardware set up so we can show it to you.
Okay, thank you.
Do you solemnly swear from the testimony presented will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Now I begin by questioning you just on the lectern.
Yes, you may.
State your name, sir,
Daniel Shoemaker,
and your business address.
1630 North Main Street, Walnut Creek, California, 94596.
And the name of your company.
Contrast Forensics.
And what type of business is that?
Crime scene accident reconstruction. I take a lot of different information. I take coroner's reports, accident, crime scene reports, photographs from the scene. I take my own measurements and my own photos, total station data, which is a survey of the scene. I take all that information and put it into context in the reconstruction of a crime scene.
Okay, well, let's back up a little bit and talk about how you got into this business to start.
Initially, it started from doing information graphics for Fortune 500 companies.
And tell me the time when that began.
It was 26 years ago.
Okay, and who'd you work for and what'd you do?
I worked for Viewcom Systems in Independence, Ohio, and it was we did corporate presentations and information graphics for all the tire companies in Akron. They also had an office up in Troy, Michigan, and we did all the information graphics for the car companies up there.
I'm presuming this is in the days even before PowerPoint, right?
It was days before desktop computers a lot,
Okay.
mostly.
So back then we're talking about a lot of art graphic work and just poster presentation, is that correct?
We had a sophisticated computer, it was called Imaginator, and it did slides.
And how long were you with that company?
I was with the company for about 5 years.
And what was your position with the company?
Senior artist.
So in effect then you would take on a project, create the graphics and the presentation tools in order to present that to an audience?
Yes, and work with the client on any modifications and all the information that went into it.
Did you have any formal education in this area before you began working for that company?
I have a Bachelor in Fine Arts.
If you would just tell the court what the focus of that was and how that assisted you in beginning your career in this type of work.
That ran the gamut for advertising and marketing and corporate identity, covered all those bases.
And you focused your career then on sort of, at that point, the graphic presentation of ideas to audiences?
Yes, the best way to communicate to an audience various ideas and procedures.
And that was done for approximately 5 years?
Yes.
And then where'd you go from there?
I went from there to California. I did basically the same thing in California for a lot of the companies in the Bay Area. And
Was that sort of on a contract basis, or were you working for a particular company?
worked for a company. I was senior artist there.
And what company was that?
Dolphin Multimedia.
Similar job description, that you would sort of take on a project and figure out how to best present it?
Similar job as in Ohio, but being in the Bay Area, you had a lot more access to more up-to-date software, more up-to-date technology in that area.
Being close to Simi Valley helps, I guess?
Yes.
Okay. And tell the court, was there any difference in what you'd done for the first 5 years to what you had done now when you're in California doing this type of work?
The main difference between then and now is doing a lot of information graphics for proposals, large government proposals. So I do two types of work. I do information graphics for government proposals, and then also I do the information graphics and crime scene reconstruction for attorneys.
And going forward then, from how long were you doing this type of work in California? Is that what you're still doing today?
That's what I'm still doing today.
So how long have you been doing this type of work in California?
It's been the last about 13 years.
And have you been doing that under Contrast Forensics, or has the name of your company or consulting group changed at all?
It's gone from contrast design to contrast forensics.
What is your role with the company?
Owner, sole proprietor.
You're it?
I'm it.
Okay. And over the past 13 years, if you explain to the court the type of work that you focused on, particularly in the area of, as you said, the courtroom work or the forensic side of it.
It initially started out by working with attorneys on designing their information on how best to communicate to the jury. Corporate presentations were at a certain level, and courtroom presentations were a bit below that. So I worked with attorneys on that. It's gone from information graphics for attorneys like that to drawing crime scenes, and the sophistication of the work in the crime scene has progressed quite a lot, to the point with the equipment that I have that I'm using now.
Okay. So if you would bring us along a little bit as to the progression, how it happened, what type of software or hardware was available to you 13 years ago when you started, and then sort of if you could progress us up through what you utilize today.
Back then it was mostly just drawing out a scene. You go out and measure the crime scene, and then you draw it out on the computer to scale and accurate. And it was mostly 2D. From then it's gone more into 3D, to the point where 3D reconstruction and also the software has gotten a lot more sophisticated with accident and crime scene reconstruction software.
Back 13 years ago, then, did it sort of start with you going out to a scene with a tape roller, where you would go from one point to the other and get a measurement, or how
Yes.
was it back then?
It was just hand measuring like that with a metal tape ruler.
And without going through everything in between, what type of software and hardware is available to you and do you use in your business today?
The software that I use, I have two kinds for using my total station data. I use software called ARIS 360. That's on the cutting edge of taking total station. ARIS 360.
Can you spell that?
ARAS.
Thank you.
And it's just the number 360. That's what.
I want to make sure that we sort of start with a foundation point. So even when you say something like total station, which may be something that you're very used to in your environment, if you would bring us back a little bit, not to grade school, but just to an idea of when you walk onto a scene or when you come on to a project, what information do you look for to see if it's existing? And if not, what information do you then try to create in order to assist you? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
It's progressed from using a tape measure to now I use a robotic laser. It's a robotic surveying laser. You set it up on a tripod and you measure the crime scene, and it'll create a series of points in 3D space.
That's the total station used now by a lot of law enforcement, is that correct?
Law enforcement and construction, road crews use that type of.
In effect, what that does is if I had set up that laser-mounted camera right here, it would bounce hundreds or thousands of points off every area in this courtroom, and then it would have a data configuration of the entire outlying area of the courtroom?
There's two types. That one does point cloud that you're talking about. The type that I have is just point by point. I normally lay out, depending on the size of the scene, 200 to 500 points in a scene. So the laser, I walk around with a pocket computer and a prism, and everywhere I go and hit the computer, it'll give me a point where I am. So the laser follows me around. So it only takes one person to operate. So it'll create kind of a point cloud of the whole scene. So if I did the courtroom here, I put it in the computer in ARIS 360, and it'll give me a 3D view of those points so that I can move around the scene anywhere I want.
How does that compare to total station software?
It's the same. How does what compare to?
Is there any difference between that and total station, or are we talking about a different name for the same software?
Total Station gathers the data, and then you export that data to AIRS 360.
So the total station, when we talk about that, that's just actually getting the information, for example, from this courtroom.
Yes.
Gathering the information, and then the way you use it is in another software like AIRS 360.
It's a data collector, yes.
And so again, once you get that information, you would go through just generally what you do when you come upon a project to either see if that information is there and utilize it, or to gather your own.
Yes, I look at the data and examine it, make sure it's correct. There's another piece of software besides AIRS 360 that I have. It's called Visual Statement. And between those two, majority of AIRS 360 and the majority of the other software are CHP and law enforcement. So,
CHP being?
Oh, California Highway Patrol.
Yeah, we're in FHP, so, okay. And so within the context of the AIRS 360 and gathering, if you will, the environment digitally, how do you then make that relevant to a presentation? How do you put people, things, events, pieces of evidence in context to what you've now gathered?
It creates the scene to scale, and then what you do with that is you combine it with other pieces of equipment. Like I've got a motion capture suit for gathering. It's the most accurate way of gathering a person's movements. It's wireless, it has accelerometers, and you put on the suit, and in real time you can capture a person's movements. So then I capture a person's movements accurately, and then I can bring those into the scene, and so you have the accurate movements of the person, you have the accuracy of the scene, and you can do it very...
If you would give the court a couple of examples when you talk about the motion capture suits, is that what they're called?
Yes.
Okay. If you would, give the court some examples of how you've utilized that technology in other cases.
You can use it a couple different ways. I use it for, well, about a month ago, there was I had to go down to the impound lot in San Jose, and there was a shooting that occurred in a vehicle. The advantage of my suit over other suits is I can take it out to a crime scene. I can get into a vehicle, and it still sees all of the movements. Typical motion capture suit that a lot of people see on TV has little balls all around it. And then there's high-speed cameras that will capture your movements. The problem with that is you can't take it anywhere outside of those cameras. And if you get into a vehicle or behind a wall, those parts of the person disappear because it can't see the balls anymore. So that's why I bought my suit, is I can take it, it has accelerometers that measure your movements. There's 16 of them. So
explain to the court just a little bit more the technology of what that is when you talk about an accelerometer and how that's better than just the visual balls that are seen on a suit.
It's perfect for court because then you can, it gives you a running log of all the movements. Say, for example, somebody hit something and caused a certain amount of damage. With this suit, I could do that same action, and from the accelerometers, you could see how much force it took to cause that amount of damage. So,
to the extent that you can, then advise the court what software exists behind those suits, or that interprets the movements of the suits, that make that information relevant to your presentation?
It's just software that came with the suit. I don't know the physics behind it, but the engineers that have developed it, they not only use it for motion capture like this, but they also, it's used in biometrics for physical rehabilitation and physical therapy, and it monitors the person's movement from day to day. so then they can see if there's any improvement.
So in effect, I could put on one of those suits if I had a range of motion problem, put on the suit, do some physical therapy, get to here, do more physical therapy, get higher, and the suits actually can measure progress?
Yes, you can see a printout of all the movements of the suit.
And does the software that interprets the movement of the suits also then have criteria that can be put into the software to identify things, as you mentioned, like force or speed of movement and the effect that objects have moving through space?
Yes, if you want to accomplish that in your reconstruction.
So if you can then go back to the example of the car and sort of walk the court through how this suit gives data which is then useful for recreation.
With the truck, I put on the suit. It was still considered a crime scene, so they didn't want it disrupted. So you're able to put on a TVAC suit, which is a protective suit, so you don't contaminate the scene. So I put on the TVAC suit, got into the truck, and what happened in that case was somebody opened the door, tried to pull the person out, and in response to him being the attempt of pulling him out, he reached for a gun and shot him.
So the person trying to come into the car?
Yes.
Okay.
So it was a very good use of the suit. Putting it on, I had an attorney open the door, tried to pull me out, and I was able to record it all in real time.
Let's talk about the, well, let's continue with that and advise the court, if you would, then what you were able to recreate, what data you used to recreate those movements, firstly, and then we'll talk about possible changes to the movements later. So what were you able to do in that case as far as recreating it, and what data did you use or information did you use to recreate?
In the truck?
Yes, in the car case.
I had accurate measurements of the truck, so I had it recreated the truck. And since I had the motion capture suit on, interacting with the truck, my movements fit well within the truck. So then I take my movements, it exports a BVH file, which is a motion file. Okay. And then I bring that into a 3D program that I also have the truck in. And then I can just place that person. What you do is you map that person's movements onto a figure that matches the person that was involved. You map it onto the person's skeleton. So then his movements are all accurate, the size of the person is accurate.
Let me interrupt you and ask you, how do you get the size of the person to be accurate?
From police reports or coroner's reports. Or
so you would use height and weight, and does the software, or a function of the software, is to take that data, input into the software, and it recreates a body in proper proportion to height and weight and whatnot?
It doesn't do any simulation like recreating like that. I just have a figure that I size to the size that I need. And when I bring in the motion capture file, you can specify what height the person is.
And can you specify their weight, for example?
Weight is more the appearance from photos.
Would it be helpful for you to, and do you have the animation available of the car recreation?
I've got another sample.
Then we'll go on to another one, if you don't have the car one with you.
This is just a simple one that happened in a Sam's Club parking lot.
Okay. And I think it's shutting down, so we might need a moment, Your Honor.
Okay.
Be able to hook this up to you.
Might take a moment. We have it on one screen now, but not that one, so I may need some help from the clerk just to do an input change. Unplug it and then put it back in, so that helps with it self-identifying the source. It's on the screen on here.
Just went off. Just went off the screen, Chris.
I think since it's just the court, maybe if we could somehow approach the bench, you could see it off of his computer screen. I think that would probably satisfy the need for me to show a video unrelated to this.
Fine, you may bring it up here. Council want to approach?
Just identify where we are. If you would advise the court, you can hear us? Ma'am, you can hear us? Thanks. Advise the court what it is that you're about to show.
This is a sample of a motion file applied to a figure in the computer and dropped into the scene.
And very quickly, how is this scene recreated so that it actually shows the environment that is the background for the event?
This was all created in 3D software.
And where the information come from?
There was a security camera. It was very bad resolution, so I went out and measured the scene and placed the vehicles where they were in the video. And this is just a better representation of what they couldn't see in the security video.
And in order to come up with those graphics, when you say you went out and measured the scene, then is that the information you then put into one of the graphics programs you mentioned earlier?
Yes.
And then we're about to see the actual animation, so how does the information concerning the movement of the animation get placed into the environment?
I just imported from the motion capture software.
Okay. And again, that's just something that you take from the one environment that you created, and then when you put the action into it, how does it get placed in the right location, and how does that occur?
I can move the figures around according to where they were placed in the scene. I can move around, rotate them, and place them into the scene.
Okay, so that's a manipulation that you can do based upon either advice of counsel, evidence in a courtroom, or even come up with alternatives as to how an event may occur, correct?
Yes, it doesn't change their movement. I can just change their location in the scene.
Okay. Go ahead and play that for the court then, if you would.
Oops. So I actually used a shopping cart to position my hands correctly.
So is that then a graphic representation of information that you took from evidence, or witness statements, whatever, and then made a graphic representation of it on the screen?
Yes.
And when you say that the movement of the person, how do you decide how the movement is, both the speed, the direction, how does all that occur?
It was timed from the security camera.
Okay. As far as that, nothing further than that.
Okay. Thank you.
Now we've had a chance to look at that animation, was there anything, before we get specifically to the Zimmerman case, but to ask this, was there anything different in the software or the hardware that you used in that representation than the one that you've used in the Zimmerman case?
The Zimmerman case, there was more total station data. It wasn't data that I acquired, it was data that was provided from the DA's office.
Okay, before we get to your specific work on this case, tell me, are there any coursework or training programs that you go through to either enhance your abilities to do this type of work or to maintain your level of competence?
Both in the ARIS 360 software, I've gone through classes in that and been trained in that. I've been through 3. It's only required to go through 1, but I've gone through 3 total station data classes and been certified in using those in both ARIS 360 software and visual statement software.
Let's talk about the total station for a moment. That's the software program you said that law enforcement uses?
The total station is the piece of equipment. It's a Sokia robotic total station.
And actually, you know, in the Zimmerman case, that there was total station information available having been gathered by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, correct?
Correct.
In addition to those certifications that you mentioned, well, these total station certifications, who actually does the training for that?
The software companies train those.
Who own or license out the software?
Yes.
And what was the most recent time that you've taken any training regarding total station?
Training in those courses for certification, I think it's been a couple of years. It's on my CV. I can't remember the exact date, but also in the ARIS 360 software, I continually update my skills in that. They have a webinar every Friday that I watch.
So on total station, have there been any significant changes in the software since your certification, or is it still basically the same program?
The same. They come up with the software comes up with upgrades every 6 months or so.
And how about the ARIS 360 program? Do you take training courses on that? And you mentioned the webinars every Friday.
Yeah, I've gone through training and certification on using that software. Not only using the software, but using it with Total Station.
And how long have you used the ARIS 360 software?
When it first came out, I believe it's 2 years ago in September, I think is when it first came out.
Do you have the current version of that software?
Yes.
And up to date on your training with the current version?
Yes.
Any other software programs that you utilize in your general work in creating computer graphics and animations?
The 3D software that I use is it's Luxology, use Modo.
I'm sorry, say that again and slower for the court reporter.
The company is called Luxology, and the software is Modo.
M-O-D-O?
Yes.
And it's Luxology?
Luxology, L-U-X.
And explain to the court then what that 3D software is and how it differs from the other two we've mentioned so far.
It's for creating 3D scenes. They use it for animation, movies, animated movies.
Does that then give you or allow you to present the environment we talked about, or the framework within which the animation is going to be created?
Yes, it's an environment where you can take all the data and bring it into it and create the scene.
So if you were to create an animation of this area, would you then do the dimensions, get the environment, and then start putting in elements like the desks and the credenzas and the clerk's desk, things like that?
Yes.
And how do you get those accurate?
The measurements from the total station data.
So that the total station would be used in conjunction. It would bounce points off the various relevant points here, and then sort of import it into the software, into the program.
Yes. And then also, one part of the AIRS 360 software is I have a helicopter. I haven't used it in this case. It's just a drone. And I fly it above the scene. I can take a photograph of the scene. And then with that photo, I have the data points from the total station of the scene. I take the photo and it'll lay it on, it'll drape it right onto those points. So you get a very accurate outdoor reconstruction of a scene.
So in effect, you can get more of a bird's eye view of the situation and also make certain that the ground level scene is accurate based upon a comparison with those data points?
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity then to create these type of animations and discuss them in the context of civil and/or criminal cases?
Yes.
And if you would give the court an idea over what period of time you've done that, and then we'll talk more specifically about the type cases and whether or not you've testified in court.
It's been an ongoing for the last 13 years of doing it for criminal and civil cases.
What was the first time that you created and presented an animation in a court case? Not necessarily in a courtroom yet, but into a court case.
2009.
If you would then tell the court, have you ever then gotten to the point where your animations have been utilized in a courtroom?
Yes.
And tell the court the experience that you've had in both civil and criminal settings regarding your testimony and admissibility of the animations.
Well, also I use the motion capture suit not only for doing animations, but also to verify a person's position. I did one a couple months ago where a person was also in a vehicle. Somebody came up, shot through the window, and then shot a couple more times. And I had to determine which shots were done with him in the car and which shots were done because the car door was open and then he fell down. So I had to verify his position when those 3 shots were fired.
So in that animation, and explain to the court how is there a name for this motion suit?
It's a XSEN.
XSEN?
Yes, XSEN's initial motion capture suit.
And you used that in the shooting case. Explain to the court how it benefited you and in the presentation of the animation.
What I did was I put on the suit, got into a vehicle that matched the vehicle that was used, and recorded my movements of getting out of the vehicle. And then I put it in the computer, and then in the figure that matched the victim, I put in the rod to match the bullet trajectory, and then looked at his positions getting out of the car to see what positions the bullet trajectory would be, and if it was consistent with the height and the position of the shooter.
Now let's talk about that in a little bit more context. So when you get in the car, you have the motion suit on, and it's communicating with a computer, correct?
Correct. And
so the computer knows exactly where the body is, in that it knows exactly where all 16 accelerometers are, correct?
yes, you calibrate it at the beginning of your recording.
Calibrate for accuracy?
Yes.
And so at that point, you're doing movement, but the computer is actually gathering data on 16 discrete points in space that are moving throughout space. Is that
yes.
correct? The computer at that point may not know it's a body. It just is keeping track of 16 data points. Would that be accurate?
Well, in real time on the laptop, you can see a mannequin. Okay. So if I move my arms up, the mannequin will follow all of my movements.
Okay. Explain to the court how you handle the frailty of an animation, because it is not the exact video of, in this case, the driver moving his arms one particular way, but rather you deciding how the arms ought to be moved and how the body moves. So how do you address that frailty of the animation?
You look at certain things that you know from the discovery, like the bullet trajectory, the opening of the door, and also the physical characteristics of the inside of the truck. And you look at different scenarios to find which one best matches the scene and the evidence and discovery that you have.
So in effect, what you do is do an animation that at the point you create it is consistent with the known information about the... Do you then make your animation in consideration of the evidence known to you at the time?
Yes.
And if that information is modified or augmented by additional information, do you then modify your animation to come into conformity with that?
Yes, whatever's most accurate.
At the point in time then when you don the suit, you mentioned a moment ago that the software allows you to change the configuration of the body for things like height.
Yes.
And then how do you then do a analysis of the person's physical size, not just height, but if the person is particularly thin, particularly obese, how do you look at that and what do you input into the program to accomplish that?
Most of that is done through photographs that you have from coroner's reports or police reports, photographs.
So do you then take measurements of those photographs, for example, do the ratio comparisons and then put that ratio comparison onto the mannequin, as you say, to make it as close as possible to the live event?
Yes, the measurements that you can get from a coroner's report or a police report, or even any measurements that you can take.
And you also look at photographs?
Yes. There's a thing you can do, which is I do not only on that, but say for example, police took pictures of a scene. One of the things that's challenging with what I do is I come in after the fact. So I have to rely on police photographs that were taken at the scene. So a lot of times you don't have certain measurements for things, but you may have one measurement for an item in a photograph. So if you have one measurement of an item in a photograph with photogrammetry, you can extrapolate the measurements of other items, and that's photograph.
Just explain very quickly what you just said by photogrammetry. What is that, and how does that assist you in coming up with measurements?
It's if you have one known object that you know the measurement of, with software, you can extrapolate the measurements of other items in the scene.
For example, if I'm standing here and you know how tall this is, and you might know how tall this camera is, if that would assist you in telling you how tall I am?
Yes, and other items, like I can tell how far away from the wall that you are by the position of your feet relative to the height of the wall.
And that's what gives you the photogrammetric distance perspective, right? So if I was this much further away, you were looking at it, it might be different than if I was this close.
Yes. You lay down a plane in the software, you lay down a plane, and if you know one measurement, you apply that measurement to the grid, to the plane, and it'll extrapolate the measurements of the other items.
And that's all the computer software that exists in these various programs we talked about. You don't necessarily know the algorithms or the math and physics behind it. You just know that it has been certified to work.
Yes.
And this type software, and we're talking about this concept of a motion suit, does that have application also in the entertainment industry?
Yes.
What type?
The suit that I have, it was used in Avatar, Iron Man, X-Men, and they use it for creating movements of the characters in the movies. And it also is used in gaming, like Madsen football. So they put on the suit and record the movements and apply them to the figures.
So in effect, when we see Robert Downey Jr. running around looking like Iron Man, it's actually a stuntman in a motion suit?
Or he could be wearing it.
Okay. And then the Iron Man is then placed on top of him in the movie?
In the computer, in the 3D program.
Okay. And we were talking, and I took you off on a bit of a path, we were talking about your experience in testifying. So you advised the court, I think you said about 2007 you testified about a case. How many times have you testified in court where your animations were presented? And do you need your CV?
Yeah.
Just moving on. On that for a moment, we'll come back to your CV. It seems to be close by, but not right here. So if you could advise the court your experience in testifying regarding the animations.
Animations or use of
I'm
the
sorry.
suit?
Use of the suit and your presentations in court.
Pretty much most of the work that I've done since I acquired the suit in 2008.
I'm sorry?
Pretty much most of the cases that I've worked on since 2008. So probably 20.
Okay. And if you could advise the court the types of cases that you've worked on and what courts you presented them to.
That's also on my CV.
Yeah.
It's got a list of the counties and the...
Sure. Just having a bit of a trouble finding it right now. I don't know if you have a copy of it on your...
I think I got it on my iPad.
Computer. Sorry?
I might have it on my iPad.
If you don't mind, if the court doesn't mind a moment for you to get that, and we'll present a copy, a very hard copy as soon as we can.
Mr. Manti, would you like to see it when he brings it up?
I actually have a copy, so I don't need to see one, but
It was provided, I just, not suggesting anything, but when it wasn't a hearing, then it didn't know that I needed that information.
I don't have it on here.
I
need it.
Manti would be so nice just to let us use what seems to be the only copy in the courtroom,
that's the front right there. It's highlighted, but I don't mind.
if you don't mind. Thanks very much. If that assists you, then tell us the type cases in the courtrooms that you have presented that work in.
I've worked on 59 criminal trials so far, 21 civil trials, and I've done declaration or testified in 20 of those.
Okay. So approximately 100 presentations, whether by declaration or testimony?
Oh, 59 was the total, or
Oh, I'm
59
sorry.
plus 21 civil.
Okay. You give the court then an overview of the type of criminal cases that you've been involved in?
Trying to figure out shooting incidents. I've worked with the Department of Justice in police officer involved shootings, stabbings. It varies quite a bit.
Okay. In each of those 59 cases then, did you take on the information that we've talked about, gather together data, and then make a graphic presentation, whether it's an animation or poster type presentations?
Yes.
And are we now talking about the spectrum of murder cases and aggravated batteries? I mean, do you know the charges, or were you just told the information?
Sometimes I've been told more detail. Sometimes I'm just given the evidence and I do creation from the evidence.
Within that context, let's focus on the 59 cases. How much or what percentage of that would you have worked on behalf of the defense, and what percentage on behalf of the prosecution?
100% on the defense. But that doesn't, some of that has also to do with defense of police officers in police officer-involved shootings.
And if you would explain to the court what you mean by that and what cases you handled in that regard.
If the Department of Justice has a police officer that is, a civil case is brought against him, or a shooting occurred, then I've done work with them on doing reconstructions on that, also assisting them in court in the presentation of their material.
Okay. Again, focusing for a moment on the criminal cases, have you actually presented testimony in court in any of those 59 cases?
Yes, in about 8, presented personally, or had my material
Has the
presented?
materials presented after being qualified?
Yes, pretty much all 59.
Okay, maybe just give some flavor to the court as to what courts you presented to, and then we'll talk about whether or not actual testimony was required.
I've been qualified as an expert in Placer County, Alameda County. I've got Placer County.
Can you spell that?
Placer. I got about 16 counties here that.
And those are all in California, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If you would, just for the record purposes, advise, when you're talking about the counties, are these counties in which the courts of that county have authorized you to testify as an expert? Where you've actually presented or had your information presented to a court where it was qualified to be good information to be presented?
All the courts where my information has been presented, it's all been qualified. It's never been denied.
If you would list through the counties in California then, and do it slow enough so the court reporter can get it down, and there may be some need for spelling. Just want to make sure it's a record.
Okay. Placer County, Alameda County, Contra Costa County, San Bernardino County, Sacramento County, Los Angeles County, Napa County, Fresno County, Solano County, Solano, Yolo County, San Francisco County, Riverside County, Stanislaus County, Stanislaus, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Orange County, Santa Cruz, and El Dorado.
Have you ever testified in Florida before?
No.
Have you testified outside of California before?
No.
How long have you actually had the motion suits that you talked about a moment ago?
Since 2008.
And in those counties that you testified, those counties, did you testify in each one of those counties, or was your information you created presented in those counties?
Information that it was both.
Okay.
My information was through either being as an expert witness, testifying in court, or a declaration, because sometimes the material that I create can be testified to by another expert, like a ballistic expert or a medical expert. Or
Do I take it that in certain cases you might create the animation or the graphic, and then that is admitted by what you call declaration, we may call affidavit, such that the underlying graphic is brought to court even without you having to come in live and testify?
yes, I just speak to the accuracy of the creation.
Have you actually testified in court concerning the accuracy and the methods used to create the animations or the graphics?
Yes.
And if you would advise the court, as best you can, what counties first? I'm going to ask you, to the best of your recall, what cases and types of cases you testified to in court. You want to go through them one at a time, or however you want to best present that?
I don't have a listing of exactly which counties
Just from your memory, what cases have you testified to in court? And what type of cases?
All the ones that I've testified to in court have been criminal
Okay.
trials.
So give the court then an example of some of the cases that you testified to and what animation you presented and what you testified to regarding it.
There was one in Placer County, it was about 4 months ago. I testified in that on doing the shooting reconstruction, and that was to determine the position of the person shot and the position of the person shooting, and then what order of the shots that occurred and what position they were in when they were hit.
And was that one of the examples you gave us a moment ago?
No, this is another example.
And did you testify in that court?
Yes.
Were you qualified as an expert in this area of the creation of and presentation of graphics and animation?
Yes, I was qualified as an expert, and the motion capture suit was also accepted.
Okay. Another case where you testified in this regard?
There was one in Contra Costa County, the one where I was trying to determine the position of the person of the 3 shots when he was shot in the car. I was able to determine that there was only 1 shot through the window, and then the other 2 shots were outside of the vehicle.
And was your testimony, were you qualified as an expert to give that testimony in that court?
Yes, I was.
One more, if you would, about another case where you testified in court and the basis for it.
There was a couple down in Moreno Valley, down in Southern California. There was 2 of them, actually. One of them was a person was inside a house. They were threatening suicide. They were chatting to somebody saying they were going to kill themselves. Police officers responded, and they were waiting at the corner of a garage, asking him to come out. One of the officers was looking out at the street because people were starting to come around. The other officer was looking into the doorway. So what I needed to do in that case was determine who shot what, which officer did the shooting, and also the position of the person that was in the house. In my reconstruction, the person in the house said that he was on the floor in the kitchen the entire time. He was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder on a police officer. I was able to show that he was in the house the entire time because of the angle of the door when the bullets hit. The first police officer said that the person came out and pointed a gun at him. So he started firing. He fired 3 shots. His partner turned around and just started firing, shot the partner in the elbow, and continued firing into the doorway. I was able to show which shots came first, the 3 shots, and what position the door was in. And then the second series of shots, what position the door was in at that time, and able to show that there was no way somebody could have come through the door when those shots went off because there was such tight space outside the door. If he was outside the door, he would have been hit. He wasn't hit. and there was no way for him to go in and out of the door, so he had to be in the,
Was that testimony then accepted in that court?
yes,
And did you actually give evidence or testimony before the court or the jury in that case?
yes.
Of the 59 cases that you were involved in on the criminal side, we'll talk about civil in a moment, but of those 59 cases, have there been other cases where you've been attempted to be qualified as an expert for the underlying graphics or animation where you were failed to be qualified as an expert?
No.
In all 59 then, either by affidavit or declaration or testimony, you were able to give your testimony in regard to what you created?
Declaration or testified was 20 cases.
Okay.
So in all of those cases, I've never been disqualified. I've been qualified in all of them.
Was the experience you had on the civil side similar, the other cases that you've talked about?
Those were mostly information designed for the attorneys for presenting their case to the jury.
Were there any of those cases on the civil side where it actually went all the way to trial testimony, where you gave testimony before a court or a jury?
Not in the civil trials.
Just on those in the criminal that we've already talked about?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk a moment then about the Zimmerman case and advise the court then what you did and how you first became involved in this case.
First became involved at towards the end of April. I initially had a conversation in August, but my first meeting with the attorneys was towards the end of April.
We had talked in August of 2012, correct?
Yes.
And then you went through a medical condition that sort of took you out of sorts for several months?
Yes.
Okay. That's all resolved?
We'll see.
Okay. And now you're back to work, and we talked again, was it April of this year?
Yes.
Okay. And what information did you then gather and review? Well, first, what task were you given as far as work on behalf of this case?
The scope of work
Yes.
was to do a reconstruction of the scene with the information that we had and creation of an animated timeline.
Okay. And what information, was that something within your qualifications?
Yes.
Is that similar to what you have done in these other cases that we've talked about, both the 59 criminal cases and the 20 or so that either live testimony or declaration testimony was given?
Yes. There's not a lot of opportunity, though, to have live audio during the occurrence. So
this is,
that was different in this case, where we're able to have work audio into it with the 911 call.
somewhat unique because we had actual audio recreation or audio evidence, real-time evidence available for you to use in your recreation?
Yes, it helps you with the timeline.
Okay. Similar, I guess, to when there's a security video camera that exists and you have some of that information that makes it that much more accurate?
Yes.
Video surveillance did not exist in this case, though?
No.
So this was within the area of your expertise where you've been qualified before to create this type of graphic and animation?
Yes.
So what information did you then gather or was given to you to assist you in the work that you've done?
The discovery from the district attorney's office, photographs, coroner reports, police reports, audio from the 911 calls. There was also investigation or questioning at the police department of witnesses.
Depositions?
Depositions, yes. Also photographs that they took of the scene, and then also total station data that they, from their measurements.
Was there any information that you needed in order to create the animation or the graphics that you did not have available to you?
Use of the motion capture suit at the scene. That wasn't available to me. So I made 2 visits to the scene.
Okay. So in effect, you came back, once you had the information and the foundation for the animation or the recreation, you then came here to utilize the motion capture suits?
Yes.
Okay. Do you recall when that was done approximately?
Second week in May.
And explain to the court then what you do with that and who did it and how you assure accuracy in that regard.
To assure accuracy, that's where it's good that I can interact with the suits at the scene, because if there's a slope or other physical characteristics of the scene, you catch that in the movements of the person that's walking over the surface.
In this case, was there any concern that you had with the data that was given to you that was gleaned from law enforcement?
It looked good, except for there were 7 points that were obviously, they were labeled windows, and they were obviously not in the position of the windows.
They're actually sort of in trees where the total station laser bounced off something different than what the person thought it was?
Yes, where they set up the total station at the T intersection of the sidewalk. They pointed it up at second-story window on the right side, and it went through the tree, and going through the tree, it picked up a few branches. So there's 5 points or 6 points on the one side, and I believe 1 point on the left side that went through a tree. So you've got points in the computer that are just hanging in space. So it's easy to see that it's at the location of the tree and not to use it.
Were you able to address that or fix it in your software that you ended up using?
I didn't manipulate the data at all. I just used the other points that they had.
So in effect, just excise those out because they were obviously sort of in the way or errors?
Yes.
Did you, in addition to the motion capture suits, we'll talk about that in just a second, did you do any other measuring of the scene now that you're on scene?
I also had another piece of equipment. It's called a Matterport.
Will you spell that, please?
M-A-T-T-E-R-P-O-R-T. It's a Matterport scanner. It also sets up on a tripod, and it has a little computer in it and some cameras. So it has one camera that takes photographs, and another camera will take infrared photos for distance purposes. So you set this up, and with the iPad interface, you can just hit scan, and it'll twirl around in 360, and it'll scan the area around the scanner, and you just walk it through the scene. So it captures all the little intricate parts of the scene, along with texture map of the photos.
What map, I'm sorry?
Texture map of the photos.
And how does that assist you in what you created in this case?
It was very helpful in getting the slope and the positioning of the buildings and the trees and the sidewalk.
Did that then make it even a more accurate rendition of the scene than the total station was able to give you?
Yes, it added to the total station data, and I verified the Matterport scanner with the total station data so that it all matched up.
It meshed pretty well so that what you came up with in your review matched the total station data?
Yes.
Did the Matterport then allow for a better graphic representation of the sloping that existed on the actual ground?
Yes.
And total station had not done that?
They didn't take very many, they didn't measure very many points. They mainly measured there's a couple metal drains and a sprinkler head or piece. They went around and measured those and the edge of the sidewalk and then the building, but they didn't do in the location of the trees, but they didn't do really any measuring of the slope.
So did the Matterport then allow for a even more accurate rendition of the sloping of the ground in the area where the T intersection was, the area where the body, where Trayvon Martin's body was, and other points along the way?
Yes.
Mr. O'Mara, Mr. Shoemaker has been standing almost
Yeah,
an hour. I thought that when you wanted him to stand at the podium,
Yeah.
that it was going to be a short presentation. Would you like to take a seat, sir?
How much longer? I'll be okay.
We're getting to the meat of it right now, and that's not going to, I have to have him review the animation for you and the pictures, so I'm going to have to drag him back down here in a moment, so I'm going to move it along.
Thank you.
So, you went to the scene, got everything that you needed to start working on what your project was, correct?
Correct.
So then what did you do with that information? Well, we were talking now again about the motion capture suits, who did them, and what frailties exist with having other people use the motion capture suits.
There was a couple volunteers from the your law office that put the suits on. Then as far as the timing for the second part of the scenario where they were on the ground, we used, or I used the audio from the 911 call for the timing of it, to time it with the shot of the gun.
Okay. Did you also avail to you John Good's police statements and I guess at that point deposition testimony regarding what he said he saw and what happened?
Yes, that was used for the their positioning.
Did you also have information available to you from a Miss Mora, M-O-R-A, a woman who said she saw George Zimmerman on top of Trayvon Martin some seconds after the shot?
Yes.
And did that assist you in the creation of your animation, putting the bodies where other witnesses saw them?
Yes.
Did you also then have, as you mentioned, what we now call the Lauer 911 audio, which has in it the shot and a matter of time before the shot itself?
Yes.
What did you also have whatever other information was available to you from the discovery?
There's also Ms. Lauer's police report statement.
And that included her statement that she first heard the altercation occur at the T intersection?
Yes.
You also had Jeremy Weinberg's information available to you and he cooperated that?
Yes, from the same location.
Now as we fast forward through this, you had created some poster graphics, we'll call them stills of the scene, and we'll get to those in just a minute, based upon that testimony as well?
Yes.
Did you most recently remove Mr. Weinberg's statement from one of those posters, since I advised you that he ended up not testifying here at trial?
Yes.
So along the way, and we'll get to it in just a minute, were you modifying the animation and the posters to come in line with actual trial testimony?
Yes.
At least as it was disclosed to you by me or on my behalf?
Yes, to get the most up-to-date, accurate representation of it.
Okay. And were you in fact able to create an animation based upon the information available to you?
Yes.
Before we view that, let's just go over the sources of that information. You had testified a moment ago that you had seen discovery, correct?
Correct.
That's what we call it here, and that's including witness statements, depositions, and other information like autopsies and police reports, correct?
Correct.
And did you also have available to you diagrams made by the witnesses, such as John Good did a diagram showing stick figures with certain placement of bodies?
Yes.
And all the other information within the discovery?
Correct.
I know that you don't know the full answer to this question, but did you get a lot of information from the defense, including all the witness statements, police reports, and diagrams that you felt were necessary to create your animation?
Yes, I did.
Did you even receive a lot of information that was extraneous or unnecessary in creating your animation, but that you wanted to review it to see if it was relevant.
Yes.
You also then have conversations with me or people on my behalf regarding the creation of the animation.
Correct.
What other sources of information did you have in order to come up with the animation and the posters that you did?
Pretty much everything that you mentioned.
Anything else besides that? The discovery itself and conversations with me.
My going to the scene and scanning the scene, photographing the scene, doing the motion capture.
Was there anything that you would like to have had to assist you in creating the posters and the animation that was not available to you in this case?
I believe I had everything that I needed to create the scene.
I mean, aside from a video of the whole event or something that would... Okay. Then I'm going to ask you to present the animation you created. We'll talk about it, but we try one more time for a moment to see if we can get this projected to cooperate, because it's going to look a lot better there.
It was working yesterday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course it was working yesterday. Yes. Showing up on the display screen. I'm sorry.
T, do we need to get Victor in here?
We'll need it sometime during the day, so we'll just get it fixed. We won't have it for later. Well, we could. We're going to need it soon.
Well, they can fix it during lunch. I still have a jury sitting back there now for an hour.
Okay, let's try it.
I had not anticipated that we